Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers. This is the Brooks Glycerin Max, and this is the Brooks Glycerin 21. Two Brooks shoes that share the Glycerin name, but are they the same shoe? And are they built for the same types of runs? Those are the kind of questions that myself, Nick, Kieran, and Tom are all going to answer in this video as we share our experiences with both shoes, let you know what the key differences are between these two, and let you know whether you should go for the Brooks Glycerin 21 or the new Brooks Glycerin Max. So let's look at how these two Glycerin shoes square up. Let's start with price, and the Glycerin 21 is the cheaper of the two by quite a considerable amount. And if you want fit options, it also offers both medium and wide fit options along with additional GTS and stealth fit versions. In terms of weight, the Glycerin Max weighed in heavier for us in a men's UK size 8. You're getting different drops with the Max offering a 6mm one and the Glycerin 21 giving you a 10mm drop, with the Max putting more foam between you and your running terrain. In terms of that foam, it's Brooks' nitrogen-infused DNA Loft V3 in the Glycerin 21 with Brooks' new DNA tuned foam in the Glycerin Max, which is also a nitrogen-infused foam. Like the Glycerin 21, the Max uses that large cell foam at the heel with the smaller ones in the forefoot. You're also getting a rocker on the Max for smoother heel-to-toe transitions. Max uses an engineered mesh upper compared to the knit kind on the Glycerin 21 with similar laces and padding on the tongue and heel collar. The designs of the heel counters are slightly different though, with a more narrow one featured on the Max. Outsole, it's rubber for the Max with similar focus areas for the rubber, while the Glycerin 21 uses Brooks' Road Tack outsole, which mixes rubber and silica.
When it comes to fit of the two Glycerins, I've got the same size in both, which is a UK 9, US 10. I'd say that is the right size for me. It's the size I've used for Brooks shoes for many years, and they fit me well. I've got enough room in the toe box, plenty of space there without it being too loose or anything like that. Good hold around the heel and midfoot. I think the heel design on the Glycerin Max is a bit better for me. You've got this kind of squarer, even stiffer heel counter on the Glycerin 21, and just a bit too much structure at the back of the shoe. I don't like that. Sometimes that kind of heel counter can irritate my Achilles tendon as well. Feels just a bit more spacious. It's still very structured. You've got a heel counter on the Glycerin Max, but the design suits me a bit better, and I prefer the fit on the Glycerin Max. But in terms of what size to go for, I would get your normal size with both of these shoes.
So in terms of fit, I've got both of these shoes in a UK size 8. That's my typical running shoe size, and generally going true to size in Brooks' shoes is generally the way forward for me. I've never really had to play around too much ultimately. And I would say my experience across these two shoes is very similar. I think these are very much Glycerin shoes. They are kind of unfussy uppers, kind of big level of kind of padding, similar kind of laces, kind of spongy laces, and kind of a similar amount of room in the toe boxes as well too. I think lengthwise they're about the same for me. I think maybe getting a touch more space on the Glycerin, maybe around the sides of the foot or the toes ultimately, but I don't think it's a huge amount in it. I think midfoot hold is very similar as well too. When you get back to the kind of the heel area of the shoes, I think level of padding again is very similar on both of these shoes. The heel collars are slightly different in terms of those formations. It's a slightly more narrow one. So I think going true to size on these two shoes should be absolutely fine for most people. As I said, very similar experience, very much Glycerin shoes, kind of big level of padding and kind of similar amount of space and kind of plushness as well too.
Fit for me in these two shoes, very similar. They're almost identical in size. I'm a size 8 in the UK. I find these to be really, really comfortable shoes. There's plenty of space in the forefoot. There's plenty of space before the big toe, and the midfoot is fairly wide as well. So if you've got wider feet, they're probably quite comfortable. The laces and the upper, they're both very plush. Very similar design to both of them. I would definitely stick to my size in the UK, and they're very comfortable shoes.
So quick word on fit. I am running in my regular UK 8.5. That's a US 9.5 in the Glycerin 21 here, and in the Brooks Glycerin Max. Overall, both these are nice and roomy. There's plenty of room in the toe box. This one actually feels even like there's a little bit too much space up top towards the end, but there's plenty of room across the top, lots of wiggle room. These uppers just sort of, they're flexed, they're nice, it's all soft, it's a bit slipper-like on the Brooks Glycerin 21. Really comfy. I find them easy to get a nice lockdown. These padded tongues take away the lace pinch into those big heel collars, and I find that's all good. Nice hold from the sort of slight roll tops you've got here. They're a bit softer. The roll top's not quite as pronounced, but they hold nicely with this stiff heel counter. And overall, apart from that slight bit of extra length, which I quite like, but some people might not want. I would recommend going true to size in these. When you come over to the Brook's Glycerin Max, it's a similar story here in terms of that nice, roomy, airy toe box with lots of flex in these uppers. They're a bit thicker, I think, overall, these uppers. Nice premium kind of jacquard that you've got here, triple jacquard. There's no pinching on the toe knuckles. It holds nicely, but again, there's nice wiggle room, nice flex. Not quite as much clearance towards the end, probably about a thumb. There, a little bit more in the Glycerin 21. I get good hold across the top. Did have a little bit of struggling with the tongues bulging out, but that seems to have settled down the more that I run in these. The heels, for me, hold really nicely. Lots of plushness. No troubling with the Achilles. That sort of flicks back there. Again, big, thick padded tongues. All of that stuff is really good. And in both of these shoes, I think I would recommend going true to size.
So I've been a long time fan of the Glycerin. I really like the DNA Loft V3 foam we've had in the last couple of versions. In general, I think it's just a really solid daily trainer that's comfortable, stable, like works well on long runs. You get a really consistent feeling from the foam that doesn't bottom out, it lasts a long time, and it's just a really good shoe. And then the Glycerin Max takes all of those kind of classic Brooks features and does it with a new foam that I think is a little bit better than the DNA Loft V3 foam, and just in general a slightly better experience all round with the Glycerin Max because of the way the geometry of the shoe is set up, like the lower drop and the rocker on the shoe. Like it's quite an interesting rocker because it really just doesn't taper till right at the end of the shoe there. It does deliver quite a comfortable and smooth ride. You can feel the softness at the back of this DNA tuned midsole and then a little bit more kind of responsiveness out of the forefoot like Brooks talks about. It's not a dramatic change, but it does feel quite squishy at the heel, probably a bit more so than the Glycerin 21, I would say. Then you roll through to get a slightly firmer feeling under your toes. So you are getting a little bit more kind of pop off your toes. It's not like it's a really explosive feeling or anything like that, but you do feel that difference in densities throughout the midsole, and it does work well in creating a comfortable but still reasonably lively feeling underfoot. The Glycerin 21 is just a fair bit lighter, and you have that kind of more snappy ride from the higher drop on the shoe. The foam's very comfortable, but you don't get that difference in feeling, so it's a bit firmer at the heel than the Glycerin Max, like I mentioned. And while it still feels like quite a fluid transition from heel to toe, it's not quite as smooth as the rockered shoe with the Glycerin Max, and you certainly feel a lot less foam underfoot with the Glycerin 21. Like I've just gone out and done a little run wearing both shoes at the same time, and that's the really different feeling you have here. Like the Glycerin 21 feels like tiny and really nimble in comparison to the Glycerin Max, which is obviously not something that you'd really say about the Glycerin in most other comparisons, but yeah, it's a notably smaller shoe and it's notably thinner under the forefoot than the Glycerin Max, which is a real big block of foam there. And like I say, it really goes all the way to the forefoot before the drop kind of comes in, so you definitely feel that huge wedge of foam underfoot. As a result, the Glycerin 21 almost feels sprightly underfoot, but you do feel that kind of more of a snap through from it, and then that thin forefoot comes into play. Like I've done long runs in this shoe and it never really felt like there was too much discomfort, but I think if you go and run at like faster speeds over long distances, you will start to notice the lack of foam under the Glycerin 21's forefoot compared to the Glycerin Max, which is really geared up to deliver a huge amount of shock absorption and comfort over those long distances. And it has done for me when I've done a 30k run in the shoe and pushed to faster speeds in the last 10k, and yeah, you're definitely getting a load of comfort there. Don't think there's a big difference in versatility though, because although I think the foam is a little bit better in the Glycerin Max, it's still pretty good foam in the Glycerin 21, and it is a much lighter and nimbler shoe, I'd say, all round. It does feel like if you're going to go out and run some intervals, it's the shoe to do it in. The Glycerin Max would probably have a bit of an edge if you're going to go and cruise at faster speeds for a while, but neither shoe is really set up for fast running. These are very much daily trainers geared up towards easy and long runs, I would say, and they both do that job really, really well, but I think you've probably got a slightly smoother and better ride from the Glycerin Max for me.
Okay, so these two shoes are both Glycerins, so as you would imagine, they are quite similar in a lot of ways. The biggest difference between these two shoes is the midsole, obviously. There's a lot more of it in the Glycerin Max, but it's a very different midsole foam. So what you get with the Glycerin 21 is a very sturdy, comfortable, not soft midsole foam, which is what Brooks has generally been pretty well known for in the past. Stable, comfortable, fairly balanced midsole foams, but it's not soft by any stretch of the imagination. It's also it's quite a stable ride. It's got quite a wide base on it, but really it all comes down to that midsole. The DNA tuned is softer. It's got a new rocker geometry in it, which really does tip you forward and is very, very good for consistent pace. I would say that it's still very much they're both easy day shoes to comfortable daily shoes, but the Glycerin Max is a little bit better at picking up the pace for a consistent effort. So with the Brooks Glycerin 21, Very much enjoyed it for daily running, daily training. I think you can do a little bit more in this shoe because the foam is a little bit more responsive. And all in all, it's a very good, solid daily shoe that really veers towards that cushion side of things. The Brooks Glycerin Max, similar, but I do think there's a little bit more energy return in this foam. I do think the rocker geometry does make you run a bit faster or a bit more consistently at a good pace. I would say it's a really it's veering more towards a tempo shoe than the Glycerin 21, but also is better at easy days for me as well because it is a little bit softer. So I think it's just got a wider span of how to use it, the Glycerin Max, than the Glycerin 21. And both of them are very stable shoes with really wide bases on them and have excellent outsoles. So really tricky to compare these two shoes, but it really just comes down to the ride of that midsole foam.
So in terms of my experience with these two shoes, or these two Glycerin shoes, I would say that, my experience overall has been very good. Now, I've spent more time more recently in the Glycerin Max, but I have actually been back out in the Glycerin 21 as well too, to see if there is a marked difference between these two shoes. Now, obviously, these are max cushion shoes, and for me, they're really prioritizing that protection. Shoes that you're gonna, ultimately, I'm gonna use where my legs are not in the greatest shape. I just want to bank some mileage. Those are the kind of runs that I would be turning to for these two shoes. Now, in terms of how they deliver that experience, I think first and foremost, there's not a huge amount in terms of fits, in terms of general comfort, all the kind of things I'd expect to see from a Glycerin shoe. It's very similar across the board. It's really down to what you're getting in that midsole and the ride that you're getting, what those midsoles are really, how they really influence that ride and experience you get. I think, obviously talking about the Glycerin 21, obviously has that DNA Loft V3 foam in it, which I really like. And I think, I love the fact it's been integrated or kind of introduced to the Ghost 16, which for me is probably my favourite of the kind of cushioned Brook shoes or new shoes that it's launched this year. Now in the Glycerin 21, I think obviously there's a lot of it there. You're getting it spread across a kind of broad base, and you're going to get comfort protection. I just found that, I laboured a little bit in it. I was hoping for a little bit more in terms of the ride and the experience, and that's not really what I've got from the Glycerin 21. Whereas with the Glycerin Max, I think it's a slightly similar story, but ultimately there's a key difference there that you have a rocker in this shoe, and I do think it makes a massive difference in terms of my enjoyment of running in these shoes. I still think I would use them for easy and recovery style runs. I think potentially you could run a little bit moderately quick in the Glycerin Max, and it's really down to the fact that you've got that rocker in there that just means you roll through a bit more nicely from kind of heel to toe than I think you do in the Glycerin 21. Now, and that's, the Glycerin Max is a heavier shoe for me when I've kind of weighed my UK size 8s, but I haven't really noticed the huge weight difference between the two shoes when I've been out on them. I think that's really down to the fact that, the enjoyment of the ride in the Glycerin Max just feels more prominent, I think, ultimately. As I said, I probably would use it for slightly quicker running, but ultimately I still would be using it for those kind of easy recovery runs where, comfort and protection are those priorities. In terms of kind of other things, outsole wise, I think ultimately you are probably getting a little bit more rubber on the Glycerin 21. There's not a huge amount in it, but I think ultimately you're probably going to get a bit more protection. There's exposed areas in both of these outsoles, but I think, in terms of being shoes that, are going to last a long time, give you a lot of mileage out of them, I think they're both going to kind of be kind of suit and kind of fit that profile. I do think maybe the Glycerin 21 has a little bit more rubber there to maybe give you a bit more protection. And gripping wise, there's not been a huge amount in it, and I've run in radial conditions in both of these shoes. So yeah, I think for me, both very good cushioned shoes I would use for similar runs. I definitely think there's one that I would grab over the other, having now tested both of them, which I'll get into in my verdict.
So I've just done my side-by-side mile. I had the Brooks Glycerin 21 on the right foot, I had the Brooks Glycerin Max on the left foot. One of the funniest things, I thought these were going to be really difficult to run in side-by-side like that, but actually the difference wasn't as pronounced as I had expected overall, and I was able to run fairly freely. Now, I think a lot of that is down to when you put those side-by-side, you realise just how much control there is, I think, in the Glycerin Max for such a big stack shoe. That stiffer outsole sort of counterbalance a little bit that big massive stack, so they are cushioned, but you don't feel wobbly, you don't feel out of control. I think the high stack feels broad enough and balanced enough. Obviously Brooks, known for its stability, known for its reliability of the platform you're going to run off, and you expect that from a Glycerin. You're getting that absolutely as well from the Glycerin Max, which if you want a bigger stack and you want a bit more cushioning, that's going to sort of counterbalance that. I guess some people raise the question about whether or not the reason why you would buy a big Max stack shoe would be to have more of that sort of really soft pillowy cushion, and you don't really notice that there's that much more cushion and road protection in the Max than the Glycerin 21. The Glycerin 21 feels lighter on the foot. It feels a bit more agile, a bit more energetic, perhaps. But we're talking about sort of small margins between these two shoes. What's really interesting is I think you could probably do similar runs in both of these shoes. Glycerin 21 can certainly offer the cushion and comfort to go low and slow and longer. Can also be a little bit more up tempo. The Glycerin Max, you would think easy day shoe for sure. Nice comfort, slow, easy runs just because of the weight on the foot. I think it can match the Glycerin 21 probably for some of those higher pace runs, but up to mid-range, I'd say sort of mid-pace. Beyond that, you're probably not going to want to have the weight on the foot. But yeah, the big shock for me there from doing the side-by-side was just how they weren't as different as I thought they would be in terms of the ride. Bit flatter in the Glycerin 21. It's obviously a bit lighter on the foot. There's great airiness in both the shoes. They've both got kind of plush, sort of long run comfort. But yeah, the big surprise for me doing that side by side is just how I thought there'd be a much more marked difference in the overall kind of ride and what you're getting back from the midsole. So I think it raises two questions. One, it means that, you know, it could be looked at as a positive because the Glycerin Max can do much of what the Glycerin 21 can do. Equally, you might be thinking, okay, I don't need to go Glycerin Max with that massive stack if I could just get the same cushion comfort, but with a bit more range and versatility from the Glycerin 21 and get it at a cheaper price. So it's going to be two ways of looking at it, I think, depending on what your priorities are.
When it comes to the verdict on the shoes here, like you've got your kind of classic Brooks daily trainer here in the Glycerin 21, which I think does a really good job of everything. And I think the Glycerin Max is just a small upgrade because I prefer the ride of the shoe, prefer the extra protection you get from the foam underfoot. It feels very smooth. It feels really good, especially over those long distances. And while the Glycerin 21 does feel a bit nimbler and lighter, I'd say they're both kind of equally versatile, which is to say not that versatile. They're very much shoes that I think are geared up for comfort, and you just get a bit more of that from the Glycerin Max. You also have to pay a bit more to get that feeling, and I would say that the Glycerin 21 is still a very good shoe that would work very well for all the runs I would be doing in the Glycerin Max. So if you are seeing it in a sale in particular at a lower price, I wouldn't hesitate to get the Glycerin 21, but that higher drop is not something that everyone is always looking for these days. But even though it is a high drop shoe, like I do feel it has quite a smooth ride. It's just not as smooth as the really rockered and the kind of lower drop Glycerin Max. So yeah, overall I do prefer the feel of the Glycerin Max. I prefer the fit around the heel. I prefer it for long runs in particular because of the extra comfort under the forefoot, but the Glycerin 21 is still a great shoe, one that I really like, and yeah, I wouldn't necessarily paying a huge amount more to get the Glycerin Max over the Glycerin 21. But if you are someone who stayed away from the Glycerin line in the past because of the high drop, but like the sound of the features on it, you know, you've got that comfortable foam that's still quite stable, it's not really soft and squishy, you know, it gives you a little bit back, and you know, a nice balanced platform underneath. You're getting all of that with the Glycerin Max, now in a lower drop design with a more of a rocker, and it might suit you a bit better. So yeah, I do prefer the Glycerin Max, but yeah, I wouldn't pay a huge amount more to get it over the Glycerin 21.
Okay, my verdict on these two shoes, pretty easy one. I'm going to go for the Glycerin Max all the way. I just think the midsole is just a bit more exciting. There's a bit more engine in it. There's a bit more softness to it. I like the rocker in it. It's just, for me, it's an all-around much better shoe. Now, having said that, the Glycerin 21, that I'm not saying that's a bad shoe by any stretch of the imagination. It is a fantastic shoe still. Very, very good, accessible, daily cushion shoe that you can use for a lot of your daily sessions, whether that's easy all the way up to picking up the pace a little bit. It's not the most versatile shoe in the world, but it is still a very good shoe, and especially for more general runners and beginners who want something that's really stable, really solid. It's a great option for that. The Glycerin Max, still very stable, but just has a little bit more to that midsole foam. So for me, my style of running, I like soft, bouncy shoes. It's not the bounciest shoe in the world, but it does have more bounce than the Glycerin 21. So I'm going for the Glycerin Max all the way.
Verdict for me, and I think this one's basically going to come down to price for me and versatility, those two things which I think equates to value. For me, I probably much prefer the slightly lower stack, slightly more agile, slightly more rangy in terms of the paces that it will cope for ride of the Brooks Glycerin 21. I put the Glycerin Max into my best pick of the easy day shoes though, and I do love the way that it offers nice cushion comfort but without being too soft. I like the way it looks, I like the upper feels, there's lots of room and all of that kind of stuff. And I probably like, if I was going just for a really sort of slow shoe, really easy sort of slow day recovery run shoe, maybe I would go Brooks Glycerin Max over it. If you want a shoe that can just handle a bit more, I think the Brooks Glycerin 21 shades it in terms of its range and versatility. And again, if you don't want to be sat on top of a big old stack and you want to get this sort of cushion protection with a bit of sort of up pace potential, then the Glycerin Max is going to deliver that. It's obviously cheaper. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens when we get the Glycerin 22, and if we see some of the technology roll down through the shoes and how that might sort of perform in a slightly lower stack, because I think the DNA tuned foam feels really nice. If you could bring a bit more energy to it on a lower stack, that might make the Glycerin 22 a really exciting shoe. We will see. But yeah, overall, I think if it came down to choice, if I could only pick one shoe for me out of these two, I think just for value, I think I'm going to go Glycerin 21, though I do really like the Glycerin Max as a shoe, and I think it's quite an exciting sort of shift in what Brooks is offering in its range.
So my votes on whether you should go for the Brooks Glycerin Max or the Brooks Glycerin 21. Now, what I would say is obviously keeping in mind that the Glycerin 21 is cheaper than the Glycerin Max. I think ultimately what it boils down to for me is how I've used these shoes, kind of post the reviews that we've done. I think ultimately the way I feel about things is that I felt more compelled to go out and spend more time in the Glycerin Max. And I put that down to ultimately just the ride being a little bit more enjoyable. I think, I would still use these two shoes for the same types of runs. I don't think they're hugely versatile for me, but in terms of being more lively, enjoyable shoes to run in, or which one is the more enjoyable shoe to run in, I think ultimately it's for me is the Glycerin Max. And a lot is down to the fact that you're getting that kind of new foam, which I think coupled with the rocker, the experience just feels a lot more enjoyable overall. I think the Glycerin 21 is absolutely a solid shoe as well too, and a solid Glycerin. I just think ultimately, as I said, I look at how I've used these shoes and whether I've wanted to use these shoes after the kind of review. I haven't grabbed to the Glycerin 21 that much over other kind of big max cushion shoes, which I would use for easy and recovery style runs, which I would use both of these shoes for ultimately. So obviously you are paying a little bit more for the Glycerin Max. I do think it's going to give you a more polished experience, and if you are looking or do like the Glycerin and wondering, I would like this shoe but I'd like a little bit more kind of fun in that kind of overall riding experience, I think that would be the reason to go for the Glycerin Max. I think from a durability point of view, I think you're probably going to get a little bit more from the Glycerin 21 overall. But yeah, I don't think there's a huge amount in it. The DNA Loft V3 foam in here is still very good. It's still going to give you a very good experience from a Brook shoe. I just think for me personally, I preferred spending more time in the Glycerin Max, and that's one I would be going for. Okay, so there you have it. That is our take on how the Brooks Glycerin Max compares to the Glycerin 21. Now, if you've got any questions about this video or these two shoes or other shoes you want to see either the Glycerin Max or the Glycerin 21 compared to, do let us know in the comments below. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you for the next Run Testers video.